So I'm doing this live web class to discuss some important and hidden secrets. I'm doing this. So take two. I'm doing this live YouTube webinar or web class to discuss a few important astrology chart reading secrets, and it's going to be I'm going to be promoting an upcoming class that's called the Swiss Army Knife, Astrology Swiss Army Knife. That's what it's called. And it's going to be a course where I describe these hidden secrets in Vedic astrology. And this, I'm going to talk about a few of those things today. And let me see, I'm going to put this post. Here's a link. And this should be something that you should enjoy. It looked like I went offline and then came back online, and then we have this whole thing going on. So anyway, I'm just going to go forward here. People should be able to hear me. Someone says can't hear you, but I think you can hear me. So I'm going to share my screen and talk about a couple things here that, let me see, let me find it here. This upcoming course that I'm going to be doing is really going to be of benefit to people because one of the problems that we have is there's a whole nature of astrological study where we're not really sure how to organize the different things that we've learned. And I'm really big on making sure that people understand this. And first, they understand their need to organize these things correctly. And then they learn these special, structures that will allow them to do it. So in this course I'm going to be teaching, and by the way, I'm not just going to be promoting the class. I'm going to be talking about a few of the important things here on this class. Especially, I'm going to be talking about some of these different factors. Now, first of all, it's going to be a Zoom class. So it'll be done on Zoom. So this will be live on August 17th through the 19th. So it'll be live on Zoom, and it'll be from 10 a.m. to 12, and then there'll be an hour break, and then from 1 to 3. And so it'll be for 3 days, and people can learn both these very important frameworks and structures that allow us to think about the chart and think about reading and think about, understanding astrology correctly. And it will also, I'll talk about some very specific techniques. And I'll get into the techniques in a little bit later when I get down into some of these things. But what it's going to allow me to do is teach a lot of these little, they're not little, but they're interesting approaches, that allow you to really go deeper into the subtleties of chart analysis. The reason I'm calling it Swiss Army Knife is because it's kind of this analogy that a Swiss Army knife is something where you take out the tool that you need when you need it, right? And this, this is a big part of what I'm going to be showing you, because there's a lot of little techniques or things that are somewhat a little bit more minor to pay attention to when you want to start doing specific work, especially, that I don't always teach. Like, I'm not going to teach a whole class on exact degrees, or an entire class or course on exchanges, or a whole course on, the three karakas, or how to use harmonic charts with the Rashi chart, or all of these little things that are methods that fit within a larger structure, because it's not a whole course. And again, even like a YouTube video that I would talk about it, it's just sort of talking about it. And in fact, I am going to talk about a few of those things on this class. But again, to just teach it like a kind of separate thing is also not so good, because you need to see it in the context of chart reading, right? So these are like special tools in the astrologer's toolkit. And aside from those special tools and those special, methods, there's also larger frameworks that are also really important. And when I say frameworks, I want you to understand what I mean. People assume a lot when they start trying to read a chart. They just kind of start somewhere and start sort of blathering a lot of ideas, and there's no structure to it. So a framework is something that allows a larger concept. So for example, this will be like, for instance, there's a framework of, and in fact, on day one, the overall structure is going to be evaluating static and dynamic factors. So again, these are two kind of like frameworks. What's a static factor? What's a dynamic factor? Again, we just kind of come at things and get confused. So a static factor would be something like the birth chart, like literally like the aggregate of the chart. People will often say, well, is it my karma to, do this thing? Is it fixed? Is it static because I was already born, right? So what part of the chart is what part of the chart is fixed and static and set in stone, so to speak. That part of it, and the other things that show our incarnation and show the nature of the chart itself, are what's called static factors. Okay, and those static factors are the structure of where you start reading the chart. Then the dynamic factors have to do with things like dashas and transits and things that are in motion. So again, what you would look and what you would notice is with static and dynamic factors, there's first of all, there's a hierarchy of importance for certain character traits. And again, these are like static factors. Now, it doesn't mean they're static. It doesn't mean they don't change. It means it's already fixed and you're reading the fixed nature. And again, I want you to understand what that means, because it's easy to talk about the chart and astrology like it's something somewhere else, right? Like it's something somewhere else, but it's actually, you want to understand that a lot of the fixed or the static factors are things that have a continuity, that where we have a continuity all the way back from the beginning of our life. For example, no matter what, even, there's a continuity all the way back to the time when you were a little kid, even though you're totally different than you were then, all of these astrological forces and have evolved in you. And there's a continuity all the way back to when you were a child. Something feels consistent. Even though it's been evolving and growing and changing, there's that continuity. And that continuity is what you would call something like a static factor, right? And those static factors are very important because they show our character, our nature. Again, just like someone who's like, if you've always had this difficult thing in your life, you can remember it all the way back to your childhood. It's not just happening now, right? It's evolved and it's gotten easier, but there's the same kind of issue. And that's what you will call static factor, and it's shown by the chart factors. And again, there's a certain hierarchy of importance with those character traits. First is the ascendant. And again, the ascendant is a whole kind of bias through which we see the world. We see things through that bias. I'm going to talk about that on the weekend course so that you really understand how this really shapes and frames everything first. And that bias and is that filter which interacts, or, which, again, it's like a static factor. We project it everywhere. So a lot of our projections come from the qualities of the ascendant, the qualities of the moon, and things like that. By the way, I'll take some questions a little bit later, but right now I'm just talking about this. So some people are, having some questions come up, and I'm just going to be talking about this first, and then I might take a few questions. So again, understanding and these frameworks and these structures are in fact, many ways much more important than even the specific micro details. Those things come in later to fill in very important specific kinds of work, just like taking a knife or a scalpel, like the Swiss Army knife analogy, right? So, the ruling planet and the dignity of the ruling planet, that's like a static factor. Again, it doesn't mean it doesn't grow or change, but it's a fixed part of the person. Whatever your ascendant is, the qualities of that is how you see the world. The qualities of that ruling planet shows the nature of how you're projecting that into the world. And then another kind of static factor, which gets really overlooked, it's extremely important, is when you're evaluating a certain area of life, you have to look at that planet that rules that area of life. But then you also have to look at the other house the ruler rules. It's extremely important. I'll give you an example. Let's say it's relationships. Okay, it's always an easy one to pull out. Okay, so Venus is the karaka, or the indicator, but even more important for each individual chart is the ruler, the planet that rules the seventh house. So let's say, for example, Pisces, okay? So for Pisces, the seventh house ruler is Mercury because it rules Virgo. So again, first, that tells you a lot about the nature of relationships for Pisces. You should never forget, this is what relationships do for Pisces. It brings them into the world of details and practical matters. It's ruled by Mercury. That's another big thing to understand about all Pisces people. But then the other house that the seventh house ruler rules is also very important because it shows how they try to do that. Okay? So it's Mercury, it rules the seventh house, but it also rules the fourth house. So you can also understand, and again, this is a static factor. This is just built in to like every Pisces person. They're going to want their relationships not only to be very mercurial, and it's not going to bring them into the realm of intelligence and bring them into a more practical way of seeing things, but it's also going to connect to the fourth house, which is their home, where they live. Also, of course, their emotional state. So this is why Pisces people tend to want to shack up and live with their partners. They tend to want to have the partner in their house, for example, right? Because the seventh house ruler also rules the fourth house, okay? So the other house that the ruler rules is a very important part in the Swiss Army knife. Again, these are little things. Like I wouldn't teach a whole course on it. I wouldn't teach a whole course on, just the ruling planet, because it's just a concept. But you start putting these things together. So what I'm going to be doing in this course is putting a lot of these things together and seeing how it fills in the gaps in your teaching and in all the information that you've been gathering. Now, the other thing to understand is that I was going to just offer this to my certification course students, because I have students that study with me for years at a time, and I was mainly just going to offer it to them. In fact, I was going to do it as an in-person course that's only available to my certification course students. I do this a couple of times a year, and I was going to do it that way. Then I decided not to, because I'm already going to the Sedona conference in late November. So I'm not going to be, so I'm asking all of my students are coming to that. So I was then just going to do it online, but I decided, well, I'll open it up to the general public as well, because these are things that the general public, these are strategies and little things that the general public has also heard about for quite a while, but don't really integrate or don't really understand. One of the things that winds up happening is that, we see so many astrologers putting a lot of stuff out there now. And, I'm not to be critical or anything, but, to be honest with you, many of them have not been reading charts that long. I mean, it's just the truth. And I know this. And it doesn't mean the information isn't good or whatever, but, this is really the result. I've been doing astrology full time, literally, since 2004, which is, it's almost 15 years. If I want to go back and be, I could easily say that it's been 15 years, because I really started doing somewhat in 2003. But it was, full time and, just mainly committed to doing that since 2004. And you learn something after doing 150, 200 readings a year this long. You learn special things that really work. They work over and over again. And it's not just, well, here's this idea, here's this idea, here's this theory, here's this thing I'm throwing out. And again, I'm just going to say it like this, and it's not to be disrespectful, but especially online these days, we don't really have a lot of discrimination anymore. Well, this astrologer says that, this one says that, it's all kind of the same. They all have people watch them, and it's all kind of the same. It's actually not, though. Again, it doesn't mean it's more valuable. It just means the things I'm going to be teaching are really things that I've been doing for like 15 years, or that I've really seen where the cream rises to the top. Every technique and every concept you hear is not as important as every other one. And these basic, let's say these structures, the foundational structures of like the static and the dynamic factors, it's a deep thing that you really need to understand, right? So some of the other ways that can really hang you up is if you don't understand it, then, for example, if you get into trying to understand, timing, and you don't really understand this, the difference between the static and the dynamic factors, then you'll wind up in these problematic situations where, for example, I'll hear people say, and again, this is what I hear astrologers say, they'll even have whole conversations. I've watched astrologers have these entire conversations, in fact, a lot, where it's like, well, what happens when the dashas say one thing, but the transits say something else? Or the Rashi chart says one thing and the harmonic chart says something else. What do you do? Well, honestly, I'm just going to say it's just not correct. You don't see this. You don't see it because these are different things. And again, people ask those questions or get into these conversations and chase these rabbits all over the place, frankly, because maybe they haven't looked at enough charts to separate this. There are no conflicts like this. When you understand how these things work, then you understand the difference between the static factor, which is the chart, harmonic charts, the karmas that are set to ripen, and the dynamic factors, and even the difference in the dynamic factors between dashas and transits, because dashas are a dynamic factor that are also a static factor because the karmas are set when someone is born. So again, there is no false choice between which one do you pay attention to, the dashas or the transits, the Rashi chart or the harmonic chart. What happens when this says that and that says that? What happens when the karaka says this, but the ruler says that? Which one do you listen to? And again, the answer is you listen to both because they're not the same thing. Again, this is another quality, as you see here in this evaluating static and dynamic factors. These are other implications of these static and dynamic factors. In order to find an answer to questions, there are things like the three karakas, right? Three karakas means the three ways to find an answer, right? And the difference in them. So for example, I mentioned relationships, and this, you'll often hear people say, well, what happens when the karaka, which is Venus, says one thing, but then the house ruler says something else? Which one do you pay attention to? You pay attention to both because they're showing different parts of relationships, okay? Because the karaka is the shared karma we all have, and the house ruler is the unique approach that Ascendant has. And then planets in the house is another factor. And then the harmonic chart is another factor. They're all different. So again, these are the things that I'm going to be bringing out in the course. And I'm also going to have some of my advanced students help me. One, Alex Clayman, is one of my recent graduates. She's, now in the most advanced class in the level 3, private tutoring and doing a lot of readings and whatnot. She's going to be helping along with a couple other students who have been with me for a long time. They'll also be answering some questions. They'll also be monitoring, the class as we do it. So again, we'll meet for 3 days on Friday, on Saturday, and Sunday. I just put the link there again. And from the convenience of your home, you just sort of dial in, and I'll be able to share screen. It's just like this sort of arrangement. There's a private member area. So of course the videos are also recorded, cataloged, and you'll always have them, so if you can't make one of the days or even one of the sessions, you'll still get access to the recordings. And I'm also going to do a follow-up after the weekend is done. I'll do a follow-up probably a week or 10 days or so after, so we can have one more revisiting of that. But again, it's going to be a lot of really practical chart reading tools and templates and strategies that have come from somebody reading charts for 15 years and knowing how to get in there and knowing what to focus on and knowing to see the difference between these things. Oh, okay, the karaka is different than the house ruler. That's different than a planet in the house. Okay, karmas and the part of the karma that arises from a transit is very different than the part of the karma that arises from the dasha, right? And the nature of the chart, again, people get confused. They're like, well, I have this really powerful chart, and I don't know why this person has never been able to do something with that. Why does that, powerful Mars, how come they've never been able to do this or that? Well, again, why this happens? Again, because that's a static factor, it has to combine with the dynamic factor. And you have to know how to read it when it happens, because it's also not what you think. So, I'll also get into things like the predictive power and the evolution that we can find through the planet signs, houses, harmonic charts, being able to read how those things work. And then the subtleties of chart analysis and the timing factors these are really, this is where you really start to be able to do good work or not, because if you can't time any of it to a moment, then you're just sort of clunking around. You have to be able to read the dashas and know what they produce. And again, you might say, well, I know that, that's easy. Well, Venus does this or does that. No, you probably don't, unless you've looked at a lot of charts. I see astrologers constantly confused by the dashas, by what's produced, because they don't know how to read what makes the karmas ripen. It's very unexpected. And, you can find, again, the most obvious ones are when you get these gentle planets that are also what's called functional malefics. They operate in very confusing ways. And you have to, and there's a couple very streamlined strategies that allow you to see that, that allow you to know for sure what's going to be happening at a particular time, which karmas are ripening at particular time. And you need to be able to focus. And again, the thing I often see is that there's so much information coming out, and it's so like this thing, that thing, this thing, that thing. It's not, there's no structure to it. There's no, there's no system. I just want to restate that, again, I'm here I'm doing this on YouTube. This also goes out to, I'm also going to let a lot of my students see it because they're used to a different version of Sam. YouTube Sam, it's like he's one of a million astrologers, which is fine. But when I'm also talking to students that have been studying with me for a long time, and they know what I'm talking about because I've taught them a system. I've had a certification course since 2012, and it's not just, here's a bunch of classes. I mean, anybody can do that. Anybody can say, here's these, here's this, and just a bunch of data put together, which is not much better than what people do anyway, is just kind of go and sort of gather random data. That's not the way my courses are structured. The certification course is structured to start from the beginning and to build it so that you understand the structure. But what has happened with the certification courses is that there's all of these, there's all of these little things like this that I wouldn't teach a whole class on. I wouldn't teach a whole course on. So a lot of these students who have been studying with me for years and years, they haven't heard me just get down and show all of these little things that they've been asking about, that we've kind of talked about a little bit, but that I haven't really brought together for them yet within the structure that they're used to seeing it. Because again, if it's disconnected from a structure, it's a little bit hard to also apply. So again, it was originally for my certification course students, but I'm inviting anyone from the general public, and anyone can benefit, because I am going to also show this within a hierarchy of itself. So I'm going to start on day one with this, with this larger concept of evaluating static and dynamic factors and these kinds of concepts. It's much more conceptual. Because it's important and necessary and vital that you understand the concept, these concepts. And then I'm going to get into more granular planet signs, houses, nakshatras, and some of this special blades in the Swiss Army knife as it relates to planet signs, houses, nakshatras, harmonic charts, how these things fit together and how you can pull the right instrument out at the right time to sort of, now you need the can opener to sort of cut this out. Now you need the scissors to sort of cut that, right? Now you need the corkscrew because, damn, I need a drink. No, but, how these things work together. Planet signs, houses, nakshatras, we'll get more granular. And then on day 3, it's more subtle analysis, timing factors, and how all these things work together, right? And, I just want to say people are doing excellent work. And I'm really glad to see all my colleagues putting stuff out there. And, but we're all doing something a little different. We're all a little different. We all have our story. We all have the thing that we're doing. And this is what I'm doing. And I've been doing it a long time. I've been doing it long before YouTube, by the way. And I've been doing the certification courses and training a lot of astrologers for more than 10 years. And working and establishing structures and frameworks that allow people to learn for a long time. So it's just what I do. And so again, I'm offering this. It's a really nice, mixture of long, overarching strategies with specific techniques. It's not going to be that much. It'll be 12 hours, only $179, Friday to Sunday, August 17th through the 19th. And, when you go to the page, like you can go here, if you click register now, it brings you down, you click on add to cart, and it'll take you here. And then you just sign up for it. Sign up for it right here. And then you join, and then you'll be sent the login information. And there you have it. So again, I'll do a couple more videos about some of these, different structures, like the three karakas, the importance of dignities, and how to really evaluate them, especially when it comes to character traits, special moments that make things happen. Like, how can you tell when major shifts are going to happen? It's not just when dashas change. It's also certain, how come that Venus Rahu was so explosive? Everything was kind of going along, and then this came, bam, everything went crazy. Why? How can you read the dashas correctly to really see those major moments where so many things change? Right? So many different structures that you're going to learn, both conceptually and also specifically. So we'll go back and look at a few questions. Nancy said, if I can afford, I'll certainly do this course. And Jill said, so many faux experts in so many fields. Yeah, there's a couple questions about why don't I do some stuff with the, I actually have a major article that I'm going to be putting out about the zodiacs. I actually wrote it. It's about 14,000 words. I'm actually editing it down a little bit. That's going to be talking about the zodiacs again in much greater detail. I did a lot with the zodiacs last year because we had to, reestablish the facticity of the Vedic zodiac, of the sidereal zodiac, because of all of the bad information that was being put out. And so one of the things that happened is this also really permeated the Western astrology world, where they had a big blow up in their world, in the Western astrology world, also about zodiacs. And strangely, it was the same situation where some Western astrologers were also throwing a lot of shade on sidereal. So anyway, I actually wrote some pretty important articles in one of the journals. The ISAR journal, the International Society of Astrological Research, hired me to write an article about sidereal zodiac. So I'm going to be putting some of that stuff out here real soon. So there's a question about shine light on Vimshotri Dasha, and does it change if you move from India? No, the dashas don't change. That's a static factor. The moment you're born, it sets up that relationship in Vimshotri with the nakshatra of the moon and the planet that's connected to the Vimshotri dasha. Then the dashas unfold. So that part of the dasha scheme is fixed, right? But then you go through your life, and as the dashas unfold, it's dynamic. And then as the planets move, it's also dynamic, interacting with it. So again, how to understand whether karmas are arising, which parts, and how they fit within the dashas and the transits. So again, you hear this false choice. Well, how do you know if it's from the dasha or the transit? They're different things. When you know what you're looking at, you know. And again, it's not to be arrogant, but when you know what you're reading, you know. It's not confusing. They're not different things. Or I'm sorry, they're not the same thing. Just like, which one do you pay attention to? The karaka or the ruler? They're different things. Which one do you pay attention to? The Rashi chart or the harmonic chart? They're different things. You pay attention to both. There are no conflicts. There is nothing confusing in that regard. It's all there. If you don't know how to read it, then you're confused. And if you're not sure, then if that's what you think, then you kind of spread it. Then you'll have endless conversations with people about how, yeah, it's confusing. Yeah, well, what I do is, and then it just goes, okay? I'm kind of joking a little bit, but this is what I have to deal with sometimes with my students, because my students also now watch a lot of this stuff too, watch a lot of videos by a lot of other people also who haven't been doing it as long, frankly. And so again, part of the reason I'm doing this course was originally for like my certification students, my very dedicated students who've been studying a long time, but also they pick up a lot of this stuff. So it's like, I'm going to bring quite a bit of this back down and show how these things are different, right? Again, this is part of like the Swiss Army knife. Part of it is also just being able to identify all of these things, to identify all these things that people think they know, that people have heard, that people have picked up all over the place now, and just say, look, here's what that is. Here's why it's confusing. Here's why you're confused. Here's why it's different. And here's an example of what I'm talking about. And again, I do it all the time. I've done it 5 times this week. I've had a bunch of readings. I do it all the time. I explain the difference of the person between the Karaka and the ruler, between the harmonic chart and the Rashi chart, between the dasha and the transit. I do it all the time. So it's like, it's going to be easy. It's not just easy, but it's very important to see. Again, that's just one example, but these kinds of things that are just sort of confusing and hanging up, that hang people up. Okay. Again, I'm not trying to diss anybody, because there's enormously good and valuable information all over the place now online, for sure. But some of it, again, everybody works a little differently. Okay. And it's just, these are the things I'm focused on, because these are also the things that I've noticed and the things that I have spent a long time figuring out, and you might say sort of correcting, if that's the right word. Right? And so, what else? I like Joni Petrie. She's very knowledgeable. Yep, she is. Dasha doesn't change. What does this say? Location. I'll be seeing Joni at Sedona, Vedic Astrology Conference. I've seen Joni for years. We've known each other, been very supportive colleagues of each other for years. Joni came on my channel last year. Love her to death. Wish I could explain my chart. Okay. Sam compiled a file of his citations for the Zodiac debate. I would recommend reading it. He linked to it in one of his video descriptions. Can't remember which one. Yeah? Yeah, that's right. So that's true. If someone wants to look at the Zodiac, I had a bunch of videos for Zodiac discussions, Well, yeah, and you can just see what I did is I put together. The reason it kind of shut all those guys up, frankly, is because I showed up with some science. And nothing they were saying was really very scientific. It was a lot of opinions. And there's just this whole thing. It's like opinions about facts. You know, the facts are India never did this. There's no tradition of sidereal astrology. India was not confused about the zodiacs. It's always been that way. But again, now these are facts. And it's borne out by history, by culture, by everything for thousands of years. But then people wind up having opinions about facts. Literally, it's like opinions about facts. And then they say those things. And then because we live in an age where it's hard for us to recognize the difference between facts and opinions about facts, we're like, well, who knows? I don't know. And then we get confused. I don't know. Well, this guy says this. And then we think it's a fact. And it's not a fact. It's an opinion about a fact. The facts are India never did it. If you want to think that the entire culture of India was wrong, and these people who've come along in the last several years are right, and everybody else has been wrong, if that level of illogic is appealing, or if that's all it takes to make you question 2,000 years of history and this amazing astrological system that works great, if all it takes is a few people to say, well, my opinion is this, and here's what I think, and here's some very strange cherry-picked things, then you're going to be confused by that. So my idea was just to come out and say, look, here's the facts, folks, and here's the resources. And so I did link to a lot of resource material about it. So you're free to look at that. As I said, I did just finish. It's been finished for about a month or so. I finished a long article on zodiacs. And it's just talking about the zodiacs. Look, I don't have any personal stuff about any of it. it wound up getting personal, not for me. I didn't, people attacked me or got mad at me. The only ones that got mad at me are the astrologers who were saying that and the teachers. No one else did. Everybody else was like, thank God somebody said something. So it's unfortunate that people get upset, that astrologers got upset about it or whatever. You know, it's not my problem. I didn't start any of it, and I don't want any drama or weirdness about it now. So and I was forceful about it. I was direct and saying, look, enough of this. It's true. But look, people want to do it, they can do it. But it's not what they did in Vedic astrology. It's really not even debatable. That's not what happened. And that's not what the science is based on. So I don't want to get into all of that. But, you know, this is why the reason I wrote the article that I'm about to put forth is because it explains it. What's needed is good information, historically researched information, so people understand what the discussion is about. So we'll leave it at that. I don't want to get into any kind of, you know, drama around, you know, personalities or whatever. I couldn't care less, actually. Okay, so is this course friendly for people that haven't taken? Yeah, that haven't taken a certification course. Yeah, if you can follow generally the stuff that I'm explaining in a general sense here today, then you would benefit from the weekend course. I'm going to be explaining those things. If you're an absolute beginner and know nothing about astrology, then maybe not. But if you're listening to all the astrologers saying a lot of stuff, yeah, I'm going to be taking a lot of that stuff that you've probably heard of, a lot of it that you haven't, and focusing it, bringing it into a structure so that it makes sense, so that you can use it, and so that you know when to use it and the context in which to use it. So that's all we have with that. So, you know, I just wanted to bring this out and introduce people to this class. I'm really looking forward to doing it for my students and for also, of course, for the general public. Anybody who wants to take the class, I'm sure you'll really like it. I actually announced it to my list earlier today, and there's already about, I think there's 7 or 8 people already. I mean, I literally just announced it it's about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'm recording this at about 6:30. So there'll be a lot of people in the class. There'll probably be 40 or 50 people. That's what I'm expecting. So again, it'll be a large group of people. And the last thing you want to understand is if you're, you know, I definitely recommend people, even if you haven't gotten my course, to try it. Because one of the things is that you're going to be on a class with a lot of really well-trained astrologers and astrology students. Again, they've been really well-trained. Most of them have graduated at 1 or 2 levels. They really understand astrology well. And what happens is when you're in that environment, your vibration gets raised. Again, I just want to make this clear. And again, it's not to disparage anybody talking about astrology these days. But when you're just sitting there, you're just listening to videos and you're just watching people typing into YouTube or chats or whatever, your vibration is not being raised. It doesn't mean that the person, you know, that the astrologer teaching you maybe isn't raising your vibration. Of course they are. They're teaching you something, and I'm sure it's helpful. But when you get into a classroom situation and an immersion like this with like 30 or 40 really well-trained astrologers too, and you see the hard questions they ask me and the hard questions I answer and the kind of, you know, the environment that you're in, it's called satsang, right? You learn so much more because literally it's like the secondhand smoke or being a fly on the wall of watching these really technical, intense, informed astrology discussions that you don't get to see. I'm sure you don't, because I know if you're just doing stuff on YouTube and all like this, you're not seeing these kinds of discussions. I know, because I know what we discuss in these courses, and I know what it's going to be like. It's going to be very detailed, intense, focused, great questions, great answers. I'll be learning some stuff because I have incredibly smart students, and you'll be watching it all, and you'll have the class recorded, and you'll be able to watch the recordings the rest of your life. I mean, you get access to the recordings. So that's what these classes are like. Again, I usually don't invite the general public, not because it's over their head, but often because I don't want to answer a lot of beginner questions. This is why I have several of my graduate students on the course so that they can answer some beginner questions and handle those kinds of things as well. So everybody will be taken care of. So it's a good question. I'm glad you asked me about, the level and whatnot. So, again, everyone should, look at it, look at the page. You'll certainly benefit a lot from hearing me talk about these things, and you take care.